My 9-year-old wife cheated with my cousin, but what they didn't know is I annulled our marriage 3 years before, and I exposed them in front of the entire family with evidence they never saw coming. I'm 54 years old. I run an investment firm in Manhattan, and what happened a few months ago still has me processing whether I did the right thing or if I went too far. The thing is, I discovered that my wife, well, the woman I thought was my wife, had been cheating on me with my cousin. And not only that, the two of them were planning to steal everything I had built over decades of work. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Penelope about 5 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan, I was 49, she was 24, and yeah, I know what you're thinking, typical rich middle-aged man falling for a young, beautiful woman. But the truth is, at that moment, I didn't feel like a stereotype. I felt like someone who was finally living again after years of being basically dead inside. My first wife had passed away when I was like 38 years old, an aneurysm that no one saw coming, and she left me alone with 2 young children, Sophie and Ethan. I spent the next decade building my financial empire and being both mother and father at the same time, with no time or desire to date anyone. The kids grew up, went off to college, and I was left in this huge penthouse, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Then Penelope appeared at that gala, in a red dress that probably cost more than she made in a year working at that art gallery in Chelsea, and when she smiled at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. You know, that feeling that maybe life still had something good in store for me. I pursued her. I'm not going to deny it. I sent her flowers to the gallery, invited her to dinners at the best restaurants in the city, took her to see opera even though she didn't like it at all, but pretended to be fascinated. In retrospect, I should have noticed it there. All the signs were there. But I was so blinded by the possibility of not being alone that I ignored everything. 6 months after meeting, we were already at the point where I was introducing her to my kids, which was a disaster, because Sophie told me straight up that Penelope was obviously a gold digger. But I told her she was being unfair, that she didn't know Penelope like I did. What an idiot I was. Seriously. I also introduced her to my extended family, including my cousin Victor. Victor was 39 back then. He'd always been the charming but failed cousin, the one who had 1,000 business ideas but no discipline to execute them. He'd studied at good universities, had that charisma that makes people want to believe him, but everything he touched turned to ashes. I'd helped him out a couple of times with loans he never paid back. But well, he was family, and I had enough money not to miss it. I invited him to dinner at my house to meet Penelope, and I remember perfectly how they looked at each other when they shook hands, like there was an electric current between them, but I interpreted that as them getting along well, not as what it really was. A couple of months later, Victor came to my office with an investment proposal. He had this idea for a tech startup that, according to him, was going to revolutionize I don't know what thing in the digital market. The presentation was well done, had numbers that looked convincing. And when I asked him who had helped him with the pitch, he said Penelope had given him some advice because she understood visual marketing. I should have connected the dots there. But instead I thought, how sweet. My girlfriend helping my cousin. What a close family we're building. I gave him $250,000 to get started, an amount that wasn't significant to me but for him was like winning the lottery. Fast forward like 8 months, and I was ready to propose to Penelope. I rented a yacht in the Mediterranean, took her to Santorini, hired a violinist, the whole show. She cried when I showed her the ring, a 5-carat diamond I'd had specially designed, and she said yes through sobs. I called my kids from the yacht to give them the news, and I could hear the disappointment in their voices, especially Sophie, who told me, "Dad, please think about it more," but I was floating on a cloud and nothing was going to bring me down from there. Ethan was more diplomatic, said something like, "If you're happy, I'm happy for you." But I know he wasn't convinced either. The wedding was in the gardens of my Hamptons house, 300 guests, a huge white tent, flowers imported from Holland, the orchestra playing, while Penelope walked toward me in that Vera Wang dress that cost $45,000. I remember watching her walk down the aisle and thinking, this is the second best day of my life. The first had been my wedding to my first wife, but this felt like a rebirth. Victor was among the guests, obviously, and I remember he came to hug me after the ceremony and said, "Cousin, you did it. You found love again." And I thanked him for his support, having no idea that he was already planning to destroy me. Here comes the part that nobody knows, except me and my lawyer. 4 months after the wedding, Penelope and I went to the Dominican Republic, to La Romana, supposedly on a delayed honeymoon because we'd been very busy with work and such. What she didn't know is that I had scheduled an appointment at a courthouse there. You see, I had started noticing weird things, small inconsistencies in her stories, the way her phone was always face down, how she got nervous when I arrived without warning. I didn't have proof of anything yet, just a feeling in my stomach telling me something wasn't right. So I hired a private investigator, a good one, discreet, one of those who charge $500 an hour. And while I waited for the results, I decided to take a preventive measure. In the Dominican Republic, I annulled our marriage. Yes, you read that right. I got a legal annulment claiming that the marriage had been consummated under false pretenses, and since I have contacts and resources, and since in certain countries these things can be done with the right documentation and appropriate money, I pulled it off. Penelope thought that day in La Romana we were on a tour of cacao plantations. In reality, I was in an office signing papers that legally meant we had never been married. I kept those documents in my safe and continued my life as if nothing happened, waiting to see what the investigator discovered. The next 3 years were a well-acted lie on both sides. She kept playing her role as the perfect trophy wife, accompanying me to events, organizing dinners at the penthouse, traveling with me to Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, living the luxury life I provided her. She had access to bank accounts, credit cards with no limit, a closet full of designer clothes, jewelry worth more than most people earn in their entire lives. And I played my role as loving husband, though inside I was waiting, watching, collecting information. The investigator confirmed what I suspected about a year after hiring him. Penelope was having an affair, but he didn't know. With whom, because she was very careful. Then things started to get more obvious. She began staying out late frequently, always with excuses about dinners with friends or gallery events. She became distant in bed, like she always had a headache or was too tired. One night I heard her talking on the phone on the terrace, thinking I was asleep, and I heard her say, "He's so boring. You have no idea. But he's stable and the money makes it all worthwhile." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but I stayed in bed pretending to sleep, waiting for the right moment. The real discovery came like 2 months after that. Penelope had fallen asleep on the couch watching I don't know what show, and her phone was on the coffee table. Normally it had a passcode, but this time she'd left it unlocked. I approached, grabbed the phone, and there it was, a message from someone saved as L in her contacts that said, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I need to feel you again." My first instinct was to wake, cut her up right there and confront her. But something stopped me. That voice in my head that said, "Wait, you need more information. You need to know everything before you act." I kept investigating, kept observing. 3 weeks later, we went to a family dinner at my aunt's house, and Victor was there. I watched them interact, and finally everything made sense. The way he touched her lower back when he passed by her, how their gazes met for a second longer than normal, the smile she gave him that was different from the one she gave me. It was Victor. My cousin, the man I'd given $250,000 for his failed startup, was sleeping with my wife. Or rather, with the woman he thought was my wife. That night when we got to the penthouse, I was boiling inside, but kept my composure. I told Penelope I was going to stay working for a while in my office, waited for her to go to sleep. And then I did something I'm not proud of, but that was necessary. I took her phone while she slept, used her finger to unlock it with the fingerprint sensor, and changed the settings to remove the passcode. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing every message, every photo, every damn thing on that phone. What I found destroyed me and enraged me at the same time. Messages with Victor that went back 2 years, shortly after our wedding. Explicit messages. Photos I'm not going to describe. Plans to meet at hotels I had probably paid for without knowing it. But it wasn't just Victor. There were other men too. Several, some whose names I recognized from our social circle. One was a personal trainer from our gym. another Asamiale from a restaurant we frequented. Penelope wasn't just cheating on me, she was betraying me in such a systematic and extensive way that clearly she had never felt anything real for me. And then I found the messages between her and Victor about me, about my money, about their plans. Victor wrote things to her like, "We just need to wait a little longer, make him trust us, completely, and then we can move things, as we discussed." She responded saying, "I'm doing everything I can, but he's so distrustful with business, I don't know how to convince him to invest more in your company." They had a plan, a damn plan, to manipulate me into giving them more money. They were probably thinking about divorce, eventually where she would take half of everything, or at least that's what they believed would happen. The revelation hit me, as you'd imagine, like I couldn't breathe properly. My hands were shaking as I read those messages, and part of me wanted to go up to the bedroom and wake Penelope up screaming. But the other part, the calculating part that had made me successful in business, told me, "Calm down. Think this through. You have an advantage they don't know you have." I had the annulment papers. Legally, I had never been married to her. I could destroy her completely, and she would have no legal recourse. I spent the next 2 months planning meticulously. First, I started transferring assets. I moved money from joint accounts to accounts that were only in my name. I changed the ownership of properties. I talked to my lawyers about protecting my wealth. I did everything so gradually that Penelope didn't notice anything. She kept living her luxury life, going shopping with my cards, staying at expensive hotels when she supposedly visited friends, but was actually with Victor or other men. Then I started closing her access little by little. First was reducing credit card limits. When she asked, I told her it was for security, that there had been fraud and the bank had recommended I be more careful. She believed it. Then I started monitoring every expense she made, not to control her, but to have documentation of everything. Every hotel where she stayed with Victor, every expensive dinner he couldn't pay for that ended up on my card, every gift she probably bought him with my money, everything was recorded. The key moment came like 3 weeks before, confronting her. Penelope tried to use the credit card at a jewelry store on Madison Avenue. She wanted to buy a Rolex watch that I later discovered was for Victor, and the card was declined. She called me hysterical from the store saying there was an error. How was it possible the card didn't work? I told her in the calmest voice I could that I would check with the bank, that it was probably a technical problem. That night when I got to the penthouse, she was waiting for me in the living room, and I could see in her eyes that she was starting to suspect something wasn't right. She asked me directly if there was any problem with our finances. I answered, "No, everything was fine, just that I had decided to be more conservative with expenses because the market was volatile and I wanted to protect our wealth." The word "our" almost choked me when I said it because there was nothing ours. There never really had been. She seemed to accept the explanation, but I noticed how her expression changed, like she was finally considering that her infinite source of money might not be so infinite after all. A week later, I went to confront Victor. I summoned him to my office with the excuse that I wanted to discuss new investment opportunities. He arrived with that confident smile he always had, dressed in a suit he'd probably bought with the money I'd given him for his phantom startup. He sat across from my desk and started telling me about his new brilliant idea, something about cryptocurrencies or blockchain or some shit like that, and I let him talk for 5 minutes before interrupting him. I said, "Victor, I need to ask you something," and I noticed how his expression changed subtly when he heard the tone of my voice. I asked him, "How long have you been sleeping with Penelope?" The blood drained from his face, literally turned white, and he started stuttering, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about, cousin. You must be confused." Then I took out my tablet, opened the screenshots of the messages I had taken from her phone with him, and passed it across the desk. I watched him read the messages, his own words, and how he fell apart in front of me. He tried to explain himself, said it had been a mistake, that he was confused, that Penelope had seduced him. I told him to shut up, that I didn't want to hear his lies. I informed him that I knew about his plan to manipulate me into getting more money out of me, that I had evidence of everything, and that I could destroy what little reputation he had left, with a single phone call to the right people in our family and social circle. I told him he had 2 options. He could distance himself completely from Penelope and me and keep his mouth shut, Or he could keep playing his game, and I would make sure he could never work in this city again. He left my office without saying another word, shaking like a leaf. That same night, I arrived at the penthouse earlier than usual. Penelope was at the building gym, or so. Her text message said, but I knew she was probably with another of her lovers. I prepared dinner, something I never did. Set the dining table with our good dishes, lit candles. When she arrived like 2 hours later, sweaty, and with that barely visible guilty expression I had learned to recognize, she was surprised to see me there. I told her we needed to talk, to sit down. She obeyed, and I could see how her hands trembled slightly as she took the glass of wine. I served her. I started calmly, told her, "You know, Penelope, these last years have been interesting." She tried to smile, said something like, "Yes, they've been wonderful," but I shook my head and continued. I told her no, they haven't been. They've been a lie. And you know exactly what I mean. I saw how her face changed, how she tried to maintain composure but failed. I put the phone in front of her, opened to the messages with Victor. I showed her the photos, the messages with the other men, the conversations about me and my money. She started crying, saying she was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that she really loved me. I told her to save her tears, that she'd had years to tell me the truth and had chosen to lie every day. I explained how I had transferred all the assets, how I had closed the accounts, how basically she no longer had access to anything. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. She stood up, no longer crying but furious, and yelled at me that I couldn't do that to her, that we were married, that she had legal rights, that she was going to call her lawyer and leave me with nothing. I laughed, seriously laughed, and told her to go ahead, to call whoever she wanted. I told her to go look for our marriage certificate, to review it carefully. She ran to my office, rummaged through the file cabinet where I kept important documents, and came back with the paper in her hand. I watched her read the certificate, then reread it, and I saw the exact moment she understood what she was seeing. It was a marriage certificate I had had forged, one that looked completely real, but had no legal value. I told her, "Come closer, Penelope. I have something else to show you." I took out from my jacket the annulment papers, from the Dominican Republic, legalized, translated, completely legitimate. I explained that that day in La Romana, when she thought we were on an outing, I had been in a courthouse annulling our 4-month marriage for fraud and false pretenses. I told her, "You know what this means, right? You were never legally married to me. You have no right to anything. Not a penny, not a property, nothing. Everything you've had these years has been a gift I gave you, and now I'm taking it away." Penelope collapsed, literally fell to her knees on the dining room floor, screaming that I couldn't do that to her, that she had dedicated years of her life to being with me. I responded that she had dedicated years to deceiving me while spending my money, which was very different. I gave her 48 hours to pack her personal things, the clothes she'd bought with my money she could take, the jewelry had to stay because technically I had bought it and it was still mine. I told her she could stay in the penthouse those 48 hours, but that I was going to stay at a hotel and that when I returned, I expected her to be gone. She tried one last time, came toward me, put her hands on my chest and said, "Please, Maxwell, we can fix this. I love you." I gently pushed her away and told her, "Penelope, you never loved me. You loved what I could give you. There's a huge difference." I left the penthouse that night and went to the Four Seasons. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I stayed awake all night wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I'd been too cruel. But then I remembered those messages, those plans they had, her and Victor, to destroy me, and I convinced myself I'd done exactly what I had to do. The next day, my assistant informed me that Penelope had called 3 different lawyers and that all of them, I had told her the same thing. Without a legal marriage, she had no claim. 2 days later, I returned to the penthouse. Penelope was gone. She left the jewelry, most of the expensive clothes, only took the basics in 2 suitcases. My housekeeper told me she'd cried the whole time she was packing, that she'd tried to take some valuable things, and that she had to remind her I'd been specific about what she could and couldn't take. She asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, although honestly I didn't know. But I wasn't done. The most important part was missing, the one involving my whole family. I waited 2 weeks, enough time for Penelope to settle into a friend's apartment because obviously she had no money of her own for anything. I called my whole family to a meeting at my Hamptons house, told them it was important, that I needed everyone to be there. My kids came, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, including Victor, who had the face of someone who knew he was about to be publicly executed. I prepared a presentation. Yes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it was the only way to make sure everyone saw the evidence at the same time. I had screenshots of the messages projected on a big screen in my living room. Photos, dates, transcripts of conversations. When everyone was seated, I started by explaining that I had asked them to come because I had discovered a betrayal within our family that I couldn't ignore. I showed the messages between Penelope and Victor. I watched my aunt, Victor's mother, put her hand to her mouth as she read the explicit conversations. I showed the plans they had to manipulate me into getting money from me, how they had used my startup investment as an excuse to get closer. I explained how Penelope had never been legally my wife, how I had protected my assets. I saw my kids, especially Sophie, look at me with a mixture of pity and something that looked like pride, as if I had finally opened my eyes. Victor tried to defend himself, stood up and said, things weren't as I was painting them. That Penelope had manipulated him too. I told him to shut up, that no one believed him anymore. I reminded the whole family of the times I had helped him financially, how I had treated him like a brother and not just a cousin, and how he had repaid me by sleeping with my wife and planning to rob me. I told him that from that moment on, he was no longer welcome at any family event, that he was formally excluded from everything. My aunt cried, told Victor he had disappointed her deeply. My uncle, Victor's father, a 70-year-old man who had always been tough but fair, stood up, looked at his son with disgust, and told him, get out of this house. Victor tried to appeal, tried to ask for forgiveness, but no one was listening to him anymore. One by one, all the members of my family turned their backs on him. Literally, they turned around and stopped looking at him. Eventually, he left, and I haven't seen him since. After Victor left, my family approached me. My kids hugged me. Sophie told me, Dad, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. And Ethan just hugged me without saying anything, because he knew there were no appropriate words. My aunt apologized for what her son had done. I told her it wasn't her fault, that she didn't have to carry the shame of Victor's actions. Everyone offered me their support, told me they had suspected something wasn't right with Penelope but hadn't dared to tell me anything. Months passed, and eventually I learned through third parties that Penelope had had to get a real job for the first time in years, that she was working at a clothing boutique, earning minimum wage plus commissions, that she lived in a tiny studio in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, that Victor had had to move to another state because his reputation here was destroyed, that his startup had obviously collapsed without my financing. I didn't feel satisfaction knowing this. Honestly, I just felt empty, like I had won a war but lost something important in the process. My kids asked me if I regretted marrying Penelope in the first place. I told them I didn't know, that those years had been a mixture of genuinely good moments poisoned by constant lying, and that I would probably never know which parts had been real and which completely false. Sophie suggested I start therapy to process everything, and I did. I've been going to sessions every week for 6 months with a psychologist who has helped me understand that I wasn't an idiot for falling in love. I was human. 2 weeks ago, I ran into Penelope in Manhattan, on the street, completely by accident. She looked different, thinner, without the shine she used to have when she had unlimited access to beauty salons and expensive treatments. She saw me and lowered her gaze, started walking faster like wanting to avoid me. I didn't stop her, didn't say anything to her, just watched her walk away and thought about all the times she had walked beside me, holding my arm, showing me, off as her prize, and how it had all been performance. Now I live alone again, in the penthouse. I've been on a couple of dates but nothing serious because the truth is I don't trust anyone who approaches me anymore. My friends tell me that eventually I'll be able to believe in love again, that not everyone is like Penelope and Victor, but it's hard when you've been betrayed in such a calculated and extensive way. My kids come to visit me more often now. I think they feel guilty for not having insisted more on their suspicions about Penelope, although I've told them 1,000 times, it's not their responsibility to protect me from my own decisions. The firm is doing well, business doesn't stop for personal drama, and in a way, immersing myself in work has helped me not think so much about everything that happened. I still have the Hamptons house, the penthouse, the investment properties. Everything I built is still intact because I had the precaution to protect it. If I learned anything from all this, it's that instinct exists for a reason, that those little alarm signals your brain sends you shouldn't be ignored just because you want to believe in something beautiful. Did I go too far with my revenge? I don't know. I ask myself that question every day. Part of me thinks I should have just confronted her, ended the relationship, and that's it, without all the elaborate planning and public humiliation. But the other part, the part that read those messages about how they planned to steal everything from me, feels I did exactly what was necessary to protect myself. Victor lost his family. Penelope lost her lifestyle. And I lost the ability to trust. So I guess we all lost something important in this story. Yesterday, my daughter Sophie asked me if I would ever marry again. I told her the truth. That probably not. That marriage requires a level of trust I no longer think I can give anyone. She told me she understood, but that she hoped that would change over time. Maybe it will. Who knows? But for now, I'm okay being just me, without anyone else in my life who can betray me. It's lonely, yes, but at least it's honest, and after years of living a lie, honesty feels like a luxury I can't afford to lose again.